So the next section of our agenda is a little bit different again, and this is where we'll be running a Q&A panel. So I will ask all our panellists to start to make their way to the front, and we've got probably a minute while we get organised. So if you all want to take have a stand up, I was going to ask you to do star jumps, but given you've had to stand up twice in a few minutes, I'll leave the activity. I'll hand over to Peter though. She will be running and facilitating the next session. So if you all want to take a few moments to...
All right, if we can start to get people back in. All right. Okay, this session I'm very, very excited about. We have quite a fantastic panel. I'll pump them up. But really the aim of this session is to have your questions answered by an expert panel that has a wealth of knowledge and experience across their respective areas. So to get us underway, I thought I might actually just get each of the panellists to introduce themselves and what they do on a day-to-day, so we can get to know a bit about you and what sort of questions we can be asking. And also a bit of an icebreaker one on what would your superpower be if you could pick one.
Okay. Well, hello everybody. Sarah Strachan is my name. I work with Meat and Livestock Australia. I've been with MLA for over 20 years. And most of that time has actually been with Meat Standards Australia. So the eating quality side of things is really where I've spent most of my time. But the last few years I've been working in a role that's expanded that to be looking after a set of programs in MLA that the way I think about them is that they're a set of programs that take a lot of the research that's happening across MLA and turning it into products, tools, services that really get engaged with producers' businesses, but also up and down the supply chain as well. So that includes Meat Standards Australia still. It includes our livestock genetics program, our producer adoption program, which is the education and training side of things, as well as our on-farm sustainability program as well. So it's quite a diverse portfolio of programs. Daily, I'm really fortunate that I'm surrounded, as evidenced by the sheep genetics team here today, by people that are really technically smart and competent in their particular programs. So the genetics side, this team's just got the technical side of genetics nailed, but so my day-to-day job is looking at making sure that what we're investing in is aligned with the industry strategy and what we set out to achieve, but also going to look for new opportunities for it might be to get more leverage out of our funding, new partnerships, and might be here in Australia or around the world across those different programs as well. So my superpower, I've been thinking that if, you know when you always say, I wish I could be a fly on the wall in that conversation, that would be my superpower, to actually be able to be a fly on a wall. And in lots of contexts, I love to do that in my kids' classrooms. I'd love to do that in certain meetings as well. So that's my superpower.
Cool, thanks, Sarah. So I'm Daniel Brown. I'm a scientist and work at AGBU, and I've been working with sheep genetics for something like nearly 25 years, working behind the scenes to help estimate the breeding values and mostly focus on R&D to make the system better, to add bells and whistles, add new traits, and that's the thing that interests me the most is making the systems better and helping breeders actually apply them to make genetic progress. And we've seen some good examples of that today, and I think there's just more and more opportunities for us to continue to do R&D with breeders and make the thing better and make more progress over time.
Don't forget your superpower, Daniel. You didn't get out of that.
Yeah, sorry, I did forget that one. So I was a bit conflicted with what to choose, but I think if I could stop aging would be an awesome superpower, which I struggle with quite regularly.
Follow that one, Mark.
Yeah. So Mark Mortimer, obviously I'm a farmer, is my day job, so that means I fix stuff. So I've been away from the farm for 4 days. When I get back tomorrow, so I'll have 4 days worth of stuff to fix. But obviously spend most of my free time when I get it thinking about genetics and my sheep and ways to improve those genetics. Spend a lot of time trying to develop tools that enable our clients to visualise and understand the genetics of their sheep in an easy way so they don't have to look at numbers. So to come up with visual representations of sheep. It was a superpower, completely unsure. I mean, you asked me I'd just like to be better at the things I do. and to have more time. So I've got lots of projects I never get to, so I'd like to be able to manipulate time to give me the freedom to spend time doing things that I like to do as opposed to things I have to do.
I think most people would probably agree with you on that one, Mark. Just a reminder, if you do, that's been a great intro to this panel. If you do have any questions for them, please keep them coming through Slido. But I might actually use my chair privilege and kick us off with one related to the theme of the conference. And I know Daniel and Sarah will be hearing from you later today in the sustainability talk section. But without giving too much away, the theme of the conference is sustainability and productivity. How would each of you define sustainability in the context of your role? So on farm as a producer, Mark, in genetics, Daniel, or from an MLA perspective, Sarah?
Well, I'll go first. So in order to do anything sustainably on my farm, we're talking about over the long term. And to do anything over the long term, I have to stay profitable. If I can't stay in business, I can't do anything with sustainability. So obviously for me, it's about ensuring that, the sheep are the most profitable they can be, but in a sustainable manner that enables them to continue to match society's means of sustainability with livestock, and obviously what helps me go through economically with them.
So I think from a genetics and sheep genetics point of view, the sustainability was different for different breeders and different production systems, but our focus as scientists and developing tools for breeders to use will be focused on trying to quantify what traits actually contribute to sustainability, what's their value, whether it be direct economic values that we can estimate from supply chains, or whether it's actually perceived value of the future, and delivering tools and indexes to focus people on making simultaneous improvement for all the things that need to be sustainable into the long term.
So in the context of my role, it is heavily an environmental sustainability portfolio of work that I'm overseeing. And so you'll hear a little bit about that when we kick off the next section. And that's largely been driven by making a commitment to become carbon neutral by 2030. And so heavily thinking about how do we reduce methane emissions, but also how do we increase soil carbon storage. So we'll touch on that after the break. But more broadly, so that's I guess what I think about every day, specifically in my role. However, as a broader MLA, if we think of the sheep sustainability framework that's in place, it defines quite a broader definition of sustainability, and environment is one of those. But in that case, the framework has got some targets and metrics around things like how do we increase the use of pain relief in animals, so around animal husbandry and care. And how do we look at our workforce and make sure that's sustainable as well, and looking at diversity in the workforce and retaining people in the ag sector as well, and looking at the community side of things. So a bit of a triple bottom line look at sustainability. What's the social and environmental elements to define sustainability in that way?
Excellent, that's a good one. So we've had one come through, and it was actually related to a similar one I had written down for you, Sarah. Yesterday we heard about the technologies, measuring lean meat yield and intramuscular fat in plant. An MSA sheep meat model is the gold standard. And why is that the case over, say, just a normal IMF grid like we've seen at the moment? And what learnings, given your 20-odd years experience in MSA from the beef model, would you provide to the sheep producers and breeders in the room?
Okay, yeah, great. Thanks. Talk about MSA all day. So thanks, Peter. So I've been saying that a revolution is coming with this MSA sheep meat program that has been sitting. We've had Pete can talk to this too, McGilchrist. But we've had a grading model available sitting in the wings for a number of years now, but we haven't been able to unlock it and release it to industry until we've had some of those tools you saw yesterday afternoon that can actually measure some of these traits on the carcasses. So I think this is a really, really exciting time. It's only been released for industry to now start uptake end of last year. So we're in a period right now we've had sheep processors over the last 10 years have adopted how to optimize processing for eating quality and have really got that nailed, because the variation in eating quality out there on the supermarket shelves, it was quite remarkable how much variation there was. So our processing sector has got much better at optimizing processing for eating quality, but now they can take and upgrade that and actually go that next step and grade every single carcass, get an eating quality score for every single cut, as you talked about last night as well. So I think it's really exciting. Now, the reason I say that is because I've worked through how the beef industry has reaped the benefits of a program like that too. And so there have been premiums being paid back to producers that keep growing year on year. So regardless of cattle prices getting higher and higher, the premiums are always been staying there and growing, rewarding producers for their ability to not just meet MSA requirements, but actually improve their eating quality as well. So that's what I think will start to emerge, or has the opportunity to emerge for the sheep industry. Now, that's been driven by brands. So when you're shopping for beef now, it hasn't really happened yet in lamb, but you will see that it's all about the different brands of beef, and there are hundreds of them now that are underpinned by the MSA program, and that's what's sort of creating a point of difference in the market and getting premiums out of the consumer and being paid then back to producers. And the critical part, I think, this is another opportunity for sheep producers, is this carcass feedback. That's at the moment, the carcass feedback that you get is pretty basic and largely mob-based. But the MSA model, the grading system now will allow us to give individual carcass feedback as well. So you'll be able to get individual traits, potential to link that back to the genetics. EID, not opening up that discussion so much, but that's going to be critical to making this all happen as well, is that we're going to be able to have to individually identify animals to also let that carcass feedback flow. So pretty exciting, I think, Peter.
Excellent. Thanks, Sarah. So in a similar vein, Daniel, one for you. We heard it a lot yesterday, and in particular in Sam's talk, where we'll be able to use the data that's coming out of these plants in sheep genetics. So if you had a flock where eating quality was important in the breeding objective, what would you, if you were in this room as a breeder, what would you be doing differently in the coming 12, 24 months to leverage off what those developments are?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. We've thought about this issue quite a lot over recent years, and I think one of my key messages would be use all the tools that we've got to optimise your rate of genetic progress. And I think, as Sam articulated, and also Julius, these are hard to measure traits. Most of the traits relating to eating quality, so we need to use a range of strategies. And I think progeny testing is important. Genomic testing is important, and these new technologies will shorten the time it takes to get the data, and we can use that to shorten our generation interval, is a clear message in my mind. So I think what breeders are trying to do now is a balanced strategy where they're maintaining close linkages to those reference populations where we're doing the meat science traits, as well as trying to generate some surplus animals in some structured way, or working collaboratively with other breeders to make additional reference animals that can be killed early in life, and that information flow back to the breeding program before selection decisions are made. So I think we can use these technologies with progeny testing and genomic testing to actually select early in life with more confidence and make more genetic progress. And I think we can see people doing that already to some degree, and I think that'll just grow as these technologies develop and become more available across the various supply chains we work with.
So considering how some of the surplus animals from our breeders in the room and looking at getting them processed through one of these plants that will be online with some eating quality technology.
Yeah, and I think that's very close to happening now.
Excellent. Mark, a couple of you. First one is, what keeps you up at night with sheep in relation to sheep breeding? And which new trait in Merinos will be increasingly important, do you think, going forward?
I'll tackle the first one first, Peter. I guess, so our group has just had a breeding objective review. We do one every few years when we hit some targets. And the latest consensus was that they don't want adult weight to get any bigger. So adult weight's fairly highly correlated to all those other weights, which do great things for your index when you improve them. So, I've got to come up with a strategy for breaking a correlation from all the other weight traits to adult weight. That's, and that group of people historically have been very good at choosing trends that become quite important into the future. So me as a breeder, I think I'd be foolish to ignore it. So that's one I've got to come up with a strategy for. What was the second?
So that's what's keeping you up, is it?
Yeah.
How are you going to do that? And then it might be the same answer, Mark, but what trait do you think is going to become more increasingly important in a merino production system?
For that, I think it's already happening. So that's more to your maternal type traits. So I can see the industry. There's been quite a growth in the sheep industry for maternal only type genetics. So if the merino, from my perspective, if we don't concentrate on that, there'll be a clear shift for people to be one away from that. So I think just having a ewe that's not concentrating on your maternal traits will get left behind. You can't just be wool. So I think that all of those types of traits will become more important into the future, and your health and welfare goes with that maternal easy care type animal.
And we should have some new merino indexes this year to help achieve some of those goals. This one's been quite popular. This might be a Mark or Daniel one, I think, but what is the biggest hindrance to genetic improvement from both an individual breeder perspective and also from an industry perspective? So Mark, maybe as a breeder, what's the biggest hindrance to genetic improvement from your side? And then Daniel, what do you see it as a geneticist?
I'm not going to say it's a hindrance. The enjoyable thing from my side, and it's just the sheer number of traits and options that we're supposed to achieve. That limits the gains you can make in any one trait, obviously, but for me, that's the fun. The more difficult it is, the more of the challenge, the more I get out of it.
Excellent. What about from a bigger flock perspective, Daniel? What do you think the main challenge or barrier that we're coming up against?
Yeah, I think it's there's several things that come to mind. Mark hit on one of them, I think, a little bit, is that our breeding objective is getting more complex by the day and requiring more things to be recorded, and managing to record all the things that we ideally would need in a large flock in sometimes challenging conditions in commercial settings is a challenge for us. And then we try and get the best data we can, but it's always a bit of a challenge for breeders to be able to get as much as they'd like, I think. And with labour becoming harder to find and more expensive, I think that'll be a ongoing challenge for us. So I think the opportunity for us is to use technology to make things easier for people to record what we need. But I think that's just going to get more complex over time. So we need to try and optimise all that as best we can.
Yeah, I don't think there are the limitations for us in the genetic side of our business. All of our limitations on the farm are business orientated. So, labour and those kind of things are the ones that keep me up more at night, whereas the genetics and the tools that are available now, seems limitless in our opportunities.
Yeah, great answers. So another popular question, do you think, and this is probably one for everyone, do you think the Australian sheep industry cares about longevity? Would a ewe with high lifetime productivity be more profitable to a commercial producer? Maybe Mark, what about in your business? Do you care about longevity?
The answer is yes, and I've put it to me, either breeding values just select for early performance, and you're breeding away from a sheep that can go through its lifetime, and which concerned me, but I had no data. Was I breeding from sheep that were all descended from maiden ewes? Or was I breeding for sheep that could last the full lifetime? So my solution was to come up with some kind of figure that I can run on every young animal on the flock that goes back historically through the pedigree and tells me how long that animal's ancestors stayed productive in my flock. And once I had that figure, was I breeding from rams that were getting younger ancestors or older? And when I ran the data, it turned out that I was selecting sires that were from ancestors that had stayed in my flock longer than average. And there's probably a few complex reasons for that, and when I had to think about it, I suspect other studs would be similar. So it might be a worry they have, but unless they've gone in and looked at their numbers and they know, are they selecting from animals descended from young sheep or sheep that can last, you don't know the answer. And when I went to have a look, it turned out I was actually choosing rams descended from ewes that would last longer than average. So I wasn't as concerned after I found that out.
Daniel, did you want to comment about any work that's happening from a genetics perspective looking at longevity? It is a difficult trait to capture in our seed stock flocks because we're trying to make genetic progress. What have you been able to look at so far?
Yeah, so we have looked at this a few times, but recently we've had a student, and Sam Walkham can probably comment better than me on this, but I think that our recent investigation using the sheep genetics databases shows that we can identify longevity in a range of ways, and just using the data that people supply, we can estimate a small but like other reproduction traits, I think, and survival traits, it's low, but there is some genetic variation for survival, longevity there in the data, but it isn't well captured generally in our flocks, and we've got seed stock flocks which are focused on making genetic improvement and not a true commercial setting. So that's a bit of a challenge for us, having the data to estimate longevity in a commercial flock. But I think that we've got tools to record longevity better, but I think what Andrew showed yesterday is an important concept that our performance in early in life in most commercial flocks drives a large part of our profitability and returns. And so I think industry has chosen to record animals early in life and focus on that. And there are more and more breeders recording animals longer throughout life. But I think we need to balance that in a sensible way in terms of what actually drives profit in a commercial operation.
No, very good. Slight change of tact. There's been a couple of health-related questions come through, and I think from some of the stuff Andrew presented yesterday about indexes and the surveys, we saw that health and welfare traits were very much something that people were thinking about in their breeding objectives and is something that people relate to sustainability. So Sarah, I might pass to you first to give a bit of an overview about some of the projects or what's happening in the R&D space around general sheep health and welfare related traits, maybe even outside genetics.
Yeah, so we've got a whole program of work that's within MLA focused on we call animal well-being, which is about animal health, but it's also about animal welfare as well. Look, it's largely looking at the uptake of the use of pain relief. This is in response to when we do our consumer insights research as to what are their expectations of our industry. And so and not that we're raising awareness with consumers around the use of pain relief, but it's like an expectation that that's just taken care of, that we are using pain relief on any of our animal husbandry practices. But when we do a producer survey, and it varies by region and by species as well, the uptake of pain relief is actually quite low. So I'd say a large proportion of our work in the animal well-being area is trying to drive use of uptake of pain relief during certain husbandry practices. Not that new research needs to be done in that. It's more an adoption, getting just that practice implemented and putting some adoption programs and resources and support around that to help producers and put that in place. In our consumer research work is when you ask, actually I'll touch on it a bit later as well, but when you ask consumers what they think about sustainability, or even when they're purchasing red meat, it's sustainability and animal welfare aren't front of mind when they are purchasing, but it's absolutely an expectation they have of red meat so they don't feel guilty in buying red meat too, because there's definitely an element of that. They want to make sure that they're doing the right thing by the nutrition or by the environment, and we're, by doing some of these types of programs, really trying to make consumers feel reassured that it's okay to eat red meat. It's actually produced really sustainably, and we do a really great job doing it, and we take care of animals and so on. So that's probably one part. The other thing, I think, talking about feedback earlier, but a really exciting part of feedback that's will become available, or has already, but I think we'll get more access to it, is animal health feedback as well. So we're talking about carcass feedback on eating quality and compliance, but the animal health data feedback is gold, and it's going to be so informative, because at the moment processors absorb the cost. If an animal comes in and there's animal health issues with it, you don't get penalised for that necessarily, unless it's a really big problem. But the processors absorb that, and it actually does hurt the entire supply chain because they do have to do that. But the feedback being collected by abattoirs now is getting so much better. They'll be able to give it back to producers, and you'll be able to sort of use that as a bit of a forecasting tool as well, to sort of be ahead of that as well, because it could be very possible that animal health becomes part of like a value-based pricing system down the track too. So we've got yield, eating quality, and health could absolutely be a part of that equation.
Yeah, and I guess to feed into that now, Daniel, we could actually use that from a genetics perspective. If we've got data, we can look at it. Did you want to comment on where some of the disease resilience type traits might be up to? And there's been a specific question come in around foot rot ASBVs as well, and if we've got a bit of a timeline, or what more we need to do in that space.
Yeah, I might just start by picking up on what Sarah said. Is one thing that's been of interest for us with the better recording of health information generally in the supply chain, how we can actually use that from a genetic sense. And looking at the variation that Sarah was alluding to, there is quite a lot of variation there in those things that are being identified. But at the moment, the identification systems don't really allow us to trace it back to genetics in enough animals, and we don't have enough expression of those things in the resource flock. So that is of interest to us to try and utilise that information for genetics research if we can into the future. But there is a range of obviously other health and welfare traits that we're trying to work on and develop better breeding values for, and foot rot's a good example, and already spoke about that several times with people over the last 2 days. I think we've got an extensive data set now driving ASBVs for foot rot from New Zealand, but we haven't had a lot of data from Australia, and we've been trying to supplement that, and a number of breeders in the room have been involved with that, as well as other research projects. We've been trying to capture foot rot data in Australia so we can actually work towards developing an ASBV that is validated and works in Australia. So we're actively trying to get enough data to show it works, and find ways to help breeders actually record the trait. Obviously a great example of a difficult, hard to measure trait. We need to find novel ways to capture that in Australia so we can actually drive genetic progress for that trait.
Thanks, Mark. Did you want to comment? You've been
slightly
involved.
different tack. So when we did our little code reviews with a group of farmers, and we bring up what are the genetic targets we want for the range of welfare traits that there are, there's quite a range in the room. So you get people that have adopted welfare traits early, and you get other people that, how dare you tell me how to breed my sheep and what I should do? And if I can't get consensus in the group, I don't have a genetic target. So what I did was reframe the question: who's worried that these welfare targets will be imposed on us from government? And every hand went up. And all of a sudden I said, right, well, to mitigate risk, what are the genetic targets we want to have? So from our perspective, reframing the question about being a risk mitigation, all of a sudden we had consensus and we could formulate genetic targets and breed for them.
It's a good way of looking at things, Mark, or shows the value of what Alan was talking about yesterday, is reframing and the question that we're asking to get better value. This one has come through to each of the panellists. How do you see breeders, or what is the best way or traits that they should be considering to be the most profitable business? And I might change that to most profitable and sustainable business. Broadly speaking, what things should people be considering in their breeding programs, do you think?
If I just palm it off to our group, and they're not here, so they can't defend themselves. So that's recently, they want to switch to ewe rearing ability instead of litter size. So they're happy with how many lambs hit the ground. They want to keep more alive. They've hit some welfare targets around your breech wrinkle, even the foot rot type breeding values have come up. and there's a willingness to spend some of our own money to help get data and develop those kind of breeding values as the group. So yeah, there's a range of things that they're now looking at.
That's in combination with a lot of the other traits that have been in a lot of people's objectives for a while.
For a long time. So for me, it's very easy to get caught up in what's new and forget about the core traits of your body weight, your fleece weight, and your micron, and those they're long-term targets they've had, and they've not changed. So it's all about adding these new ones in and changing the dials and pressures on each one.
Daniel, did you want to answer that question as well?
I'll attempt to, Peter. But I think from a sheep genetics perspective and the R&D that we're doing behind the scenes, we're trying to focus on commercial profitability. So when we're setting up objectives, we're trying to represent the most common production systems and make sure we're focusing on traits that influence commercial profitability for that production system. And I guess we do try and do an extensive job to try and capture those as well as we can. But I think that in the future we'll see more tailoring of objectives to specific commercial production systems and their supply chains. And I think one of the struggles we have is what's influencing profitability now versus the future. And everyone has a different version of the future, and we're trying to capture those traits. And a lot of breeders are actively thinking about 10 or 20 years ahead, and eating quality has been a good example of that. We started selecting for that in 2007, I think, and they're saying now we're starting to see price signals. So managing the process of selling rams in a competitive marketplace now, but breeding for the future and all these sustainability traits that we know are coming towards us is a challenge that we struggle with on a daily basis. So, I think it's important that we focus on keeping producers and breeders sustainable in the short term, but breed for the long term and capturing these additional traits that are going to keep coming all the time for us to deal with.
Excellent. And Sarah, more broadly, like rather than Mark's spoken about specific traits like ERA, what groups or areas that would you be, should our sheep breeders in the room be considering?
Thanks, Peter. You're acknowledging my limitation on.
You're sitting next to Daniel Brown, so
next to, out of my depth here with these guys. So yeah, getting my advice on a breeding program is probably not the wisest. But however, I tell you the things that do jump to mind for me where I believe genetics has an influence is So if I'm thinking environmental sustainability, I think there's an opportunity to be looking at how do we reduce our emissions intensity through genetic selection on traits things around feed conversion, efficiency, and so on. Again, we'll talk about that in this next section where you'll get a bit more detail on that. But then I think we're not hiding away from the fact that what's a non-mule flock look like into the future as well. So thinking about those types of that as a grouping. And then eating quality, and not just because that's sort of where I've spent a lot of time, but unless our product actually is edible and attractive to the consumer, they won't keep coming back just because. It really has to stand up and perform as well. So I really see that opportunity there.
I guess I suppose I should add that the group chooses one of the core indexes. So we're all self-replacement merino flocks, so we choose the MP plus index, and we have a target of 4.5 index points gains per year. But we don't use that index as our breeding objective. But that has to be achieved as well as. So that's the underlying economic component, because it's a economic index. So that's the core answer to your question without getting distracted by the other traits.
No, and that ties in well with what Andrew presented, that there's breeding objectives and there's indexes, and they're not the same thing. All right, there's one here, it's probably a Daniel one, but I might also throw to Sarah in terms of what's happened in beef in this space. But what work is being done for commercial producers in regards to flock profiles for other breeds? So I know we've had a project come through the NLGC project call around this. So Daniel, I might get you to talk about sheep, and then Sarah, I might get you to talk about some of the beef stuff that's happened in this space with the Ben Hayes project.
So I guess the flock profile tool, genomic benchmark a commercial merino flock has been a good tool for the merino industry, and we've been actively trying to assess that in, let's say, crossbred lamb production flocks. So we've done some pilot work where we've looked at the same sort of technique in maternals and terminals, and within LambPlan, using the LambPlan data set to do that, we can show that that tool is also going to be useful in non-merino flocks. And one of the challenges for us is that our seed stock flocks do not entirely represent the breed composition we see in commercial lamb flocks. So we've embarked on developing a project to actually validate the potential of these tools in a commercial lamb production flock, which might be from variable breed composition. So that work's underway, and at the moment we've got preliminary evidence to support the fact that these tools should work in this situation, but how we actually roll it out to industry is another challenge for us, given that we've got ASBVs for merinos, maternals and terminals. So it's a bit easier when you've just got merino flocks being benchmarked against merino select ASBVs, but when you've got a commercial flock which has genetics from 3 different analyses, how do we actually report something sensible to you as a commercial producer? So that's some of the challenges we're working through, but I think it's definitely a possibility, and I think that with time we'll be able to develop something useful for industry to use.
And we've got that project underway, or looking at getting that nearly at the contracting phase, where that is one of the key outcomes of that project. So it'll be exciting to see, because we've seen in the merino space with flock profile, it's been a great adoption tool. It's a great way to start the conversation around genetics. So it would be, it is something that we would like to see in our other crossbred systems. So Sarah, just might get you to comment on some of the beef space, because we've got actually quite a bit of work that's quite similar, or a lot of parallels can be drawn.
Yeah, sheep genetics has been a gold standard for a couple of areas for us to replicate into the beef industry as well. And so this flock profile tool, we've essentially created the equivalent as a herd profile tool, targeted at the northern cattle industry in particular, but certainly not an exclusive there. But looking at what we're sort of looking, well, how do you drive even greater genetic progress we're thinking about the northern beef industry, and it really is about getting to the commercial, we feel, getting to the commercial producer, doing a great job as seed stock sector. How do we get the commercial producer utilising genetics in their decision when they actually might not be the main thing there, and they may not be, as not being seed stock producers, it may not be the front of mind for them all the time, but we want them to be making better decisions using genetic information. So how do we put some really user-friendly, easy to understand tools in their hands? And so we've created essentially the flock profile tool as a herd profile tool. Cheap, it's quick. We're getting to a point where we'd like to potentially get down to crush side type genomic tools as well. So that's actually something we've worked on the last couple of years. It's now available. We're working through how do you actually make that a really streamlined retailing pipeline for that product, but it's certainly something we're offering to cattle producers now too. I think the other one I was just going to touch on, Peter, that sheep genetics or the sheep sector has been a gold standard on, is having essentially multi-breed evaluations, and that is something the cattle industry does not have. Just from the structure of how we've got genetic evaluations set up. So it's a real opportunity, and one that we're venturing into to collect that breed head-to-head data on, so we can head down that track as well. But you're really leading the way on it as an example of the benefits of doing that.
Yeah, it is a bit of a gold standard when you talk to the beef guys, that our maternal and terminal evaluations, you can compare different breeds head-to-head on the same breeding values. But obviously it becomes more complex when we're thinking flock profile, when you've got breeds from across the different analyses. So to each of the panellists, what would you suggest in becoming more engaged and on the forefront of industry rather than waiting for industry to catch up? So what would you suggest to our leading breeders in the room on how they become more engaged and at the forefront, and wait rather than always having to wait for others to catch up?
Yeah, I think there's probably a range of things that come to my mind, and I think some of these sustainability traits are a good example in my mind. I think we need to be more actively trying to deal with the difficult traits, like foot rot, for example, fly strike. I think we need to be actually more proactively trying to generate data for these difficult traits that are affecting commercial producers and our sustainability of some sheep production systems. So I also, I think we need to be more proactively promoting all the good things we're doing in genetics, and Julia's touched on it yesterday, that our extension and engagement through the resource flock, I think, has been less than what we could have done, and we need to really capitalise on all the great investment that we've done with MLA and AWI support and industry support, and show our credentials to industry, and more generally use it for marketing of our RAMs, and also all the good things that we've done from an R&D and industry perspective.
What about from your perspective, Mark? You're often seen by breeders as, someone that's been leading the charge for a while. How do you stay out in front and stay motivated when there are laggards out there in industry? What's your mindset?
Just be obsessed about what you're doing to the point that you ignore the economics.
That's left of field.
Yeah. Well, that's why am I doing so well at genetics on my flock? That's because that's what I'm obsessed about. And will I take extra measurements past the point where my accountant might say, why are you doing that? The answer is yes. But it's had its own payoffs. I mean, that's... so if you're going to lead the field and you want to adopt something, like eating quality is a perfect example. The guys driving eating quality are doing it without an economic payoff. So the analogy holds true. So, get your crystal ball out, talk to lots of people, have a think where you need to be, and then you've got to put money in now before you get a payoff. Genetics is a long-term game. You're probably going to make some mistakes. Don't choose one thing. A tip for me, how do I familiarise myself with something new? So as a merino breeder, I don't get any clients coming to me asking about eating quality and shear force. But in order, I need to be familiar with it, so I've made those traits part of my standard internal reports, so I get, every time I use a sire, I get to see the percentile band it sits. So it's about familiarising myself with that stuff. And eventually, 3/4 of the sire team's got a shear force in the 90th percentile. That's probably not good. So it's about familiarising yourself with those new traits, and if you don't familiarise yourself with them, you don't look at them, and you're not aware of what's happening.
Use them as they become available. Yeah.
I don't think my message was actually too dissimilar, because I was going to say I really acknowledge that and empathetic to why would a producer do something different if no one's paying you any differently? And so the pricing signals, I guess we've seen in eating quality, has driven producer change. Now, they may not be there right now for the sheep industry in eating quality. I think it is, as a leading set of breeders, a leading group of breeders, so keeping ahead of and having a bit of more of a global outlook as to what are the trends that are coming, keeping in touch with what are the insights we're seeing from essentially the consumer and the market trends, and what are they telling that they're actually going to want from lamb in the very near future, and responding to that, acknowledging whilst there might not be a pricing signal there, but that can change very quickly too. So then you're in the box seat to take advantage of that.
And I know it's going to be used as an analogy for many years, but you've only got to look at what happened with COVID and how quickly the world can change. So thank you everyone for the questions. One final one to wrap up. The year is 2033. It's March. We've got a leading breeder forum. You've been invited back onto the panel. Using your crystal ball, what will we be talking about? Or what would you like to see us talking about?
Daniel will be talking about the neural networks that create breeding values instantly for clients. We submit our data and instantly get breeding values back without any need of any linkage.
He'll also have no hair left.
I'll be 4 years from retirement.
That anti-aging.
Yeah, I'll use my superpower and I'll be fine. But I think that we're constantly dealing with the growth in both the number of breeders, the number of animals, the number of traits, the number of genotypes, and I can see that we're going to have to keep rapidly evolving at the genetic evaluation end, and I can see this already that we're going to have to work harder to keep in front of the increasing volume of data, and technology will be helping us more and more. We'll have lots more data, and the analysis will look very different. But we'll be delivering, better breeding values for a larger range of traits.
Yeah, I was going to use your superpower as well, the anti-aging one. That'd be pretty good by 2033. So we'll be carbon neutral. I'm really confident that we'll get there. And so we'll be past that conversation, but we'll be leading the world there. So people will be looking at us as to how did we do it. Our flock size it's already on the incline. And so we'll be managing how do we keep increasing that flock size through all the efficiencies that we've picked up whilst keeping that carbon neutral status. And then I think the technology space, it's been a long time coming to get to where you saw Pete show some of those technologies, but now it's just going to be, I think, exponentially changed. So that, I think, will also change the way that we might be collecting data and assessing animals and as well. So we've been talking about like a digital world for a long time, but and your semi-trailer slide, you won't have a slide big enough, I think. Like the data's just going to be endless as well. But getting our heads around how to use that is, I think, a massive challenge as well.
Fantastic. Well, please put your hands together for our wonderful panelists. Thank you.